Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Clark with Next Gen Global Leaders. So happy you could join us today. We're excited to have Eric Willis as our teacher. Eric is a good friend I've known many years. Eric has also helped me. So this is why I know this process works. It took me to a farm, well, a farm or a ranch, whatever you want to, a ranch here in Texas. And went through some of these exercises that you will go through today. And it was really helpful for me and understanding my purpose and dealing with conflict in my life and different things. So I know this works. So that's why I can give it the stamp of approval. It is a trying time for all of us, especially as leaders. People are coming at us from every way, making a decision because we have to make decisions, hard decisions. Here in the U.S., is do you require masks or not require masks? Do you come back to work or do you stay virtual or do you allow travel? There's so many decisions as leaders we're having to make in the organization, and what that's caused is conflict because conflict is there anyway. As Eric will be teaching, we will always have conflict, but it just seems like it's more intense now. Around the world, people have had enough. People are protesting. Everywhere you look, there's protests. There's different conflict. There's anger because our norms have been taken away, and we don't know if or when we're ever going to have that back. So you put all that together into this pot called this world we live in, and people are just angry, and when they are angry, they lash out, and that is a hard time for a leader to be a peacemaker, and so this is why we were just excited that Eric said yes to joining us and teaching us because there's so much for us to learn in this process. So as you go forward, be listening and answering questions, and then we will even have a time of reflection that you can take with you as you go forward. That's always the goal here at Next Gen Global Leaders, that we just don't provide some information that you just listen to, but it's something that you take with you as we finish and as you finish watching the video. So that's enough of my time, and I want to hand this over so Eric can get started, and we listen, and you have a time of learning under his wisdom. Just a little background: Eric is working on his PhD at Abilene Christian University in organizational leadership, with a focus in positive leadership, and he has, unfortunately. In leadership, we learn in many ways, and most of the time we learn is from experience. And Eric has gone through so many different experiences in life that have taught him how to deal with conflict and how to stay focused on your purpose during this time. And he comes not only with experience in ministry and in different backgrounds, but now he's combining that with academic research, and so he's dangerous now. He's dangerous. He has both. So thank you for joining us. Jennifer has been helping get everything signed on. She's a great teammate and much needed teammate. She will be handling the mute buttons behind us and making sure that we're able to stay focused on what Eric's talking. But when Eric asks a question, you will get a chance to respond, of course, but just make sure your mute button is turned off, so we can hear you. So thank you again, and now I'll turn it over to you, Eric, to get this started.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for the invitation to teach and to share some of the experiences and what I have on conflict. So it's a privilege for me to be here. And it's great to see your faces. It's great to be with you. For me, it's in the morning here in the U.S. For some of you, if not most of you, you're getting ready to end your day. And so thank you for spending your time with us today. I'm going to be sharing my screen here in just a minute because I want to walk you through some slides and for us to be able to walk through that together. And one of the things I want to make clear up front is that I enjoy interaction. So I want to invite you to be comfortable using the chat function. And on your screen, let me get my screen shared with you this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whatever it is. All right. And let's do this. You can introduce yourself in the chat if you don't mind with just your name. And if you're comfortable sharing where you're watching from, then please do so. If not, that's fine. But if you could just put your name in the chat, I want to make sure I'm able to engage with that because I want to, like I said, this will be interactive. And for those of you who are live with us on this call, you're getting the benefit of real-time interaction. If you're watching later in one of the modules and it's recorded, you'll be able to benefit from those who were live with us. So, all right, Joseph, thank you. Oh, Jay from Dallas, you're here. Great. So, welcome. So that chat function is at the bottom of the screen. You'll be able to click and type the message. It's going to be the main way that we're going to communicate. I'm going to be asking some questions and looking for your response. Hello, Felix. Glad you're here. And Myanmar, Sang, great to see you. Yes. And so as we go through this presentation, I'm going to be asking some questions. Tobias, great to see you. And I welcome your input, welcome your questions along the way. And at the very end, you'll have an opportunity to unmute and ask questions and we can talk. And if you prefer that way as well. So I am going to be focusing on this presentation for you. And it is on, all right, let me make sure that it's working here. There we go. It's on conflict. So when you hear the word conflict or you see the word conflict, what are some of the things that creates in you, or what do you think of when you think of the word conflict? So let me see some of the responses in the chat that you have here. Hello, Chandara. Nice to see you. Glad you're here. Yes, not peace. Yeah. And so this conflict, would you say that it's more positive or negative when you think of the word or the term conflict? Is it good? Is it bad? Yeah, disagreement. Yeah, Joseph, usually negative is how it comes across. You see, conflict, if what I'm going to be showing you about conflict, what we're going to learn is that conflict can actually be used for good. That when you think of conflict, where was the first conflict in all of human history, in all of history itself? Where was the first conflict? Some people would say it was the Garden of Eden. I actually will take it back further. The first conflict happened in heaven. But isn't heaven a perfect place? There's no sin allowed. And that is why conflict was in heaven, because God the Father cast Lucifer, the angel, out of heaven. There was a conflict in heaven. And so conflict is not good or bad, right or wrong. Conflict is amoral. It is a state. that we enter in, similar to an emotion, but conflict conjures up our emotions. So if conflict is amoral, if it is neither good or bad, what is conflict? And yes, it's typically tied to something negative, but I want to propose that conflict is an inside out progression, not an outside in aggression. So when we think of conflict, oftentimes we think about the thing. I'm in conflict with this person, or I'm in conflict over this situation. See, conflict isn't about the situation. It's not about the environment. Conflict is about the inside out progression. It comes from the inside out because we feel conflict on the inside, don't we? There are emotions that we feel, anxiety, anger. We feel these things welling up inside of us. But conflict is an inside out progression, not an outside in aggression toward us. Regardless of the events, the situation, or circumstances, conflict comes from within a person. So what is it within us that conjures this conflict? If it's not about the words that have been said or the things that have been done around us, and it's not our environment or our circumstances or situation, what is it within us? It stems and connects to our belief system. It's what we believe in the core of our being. It's our thoughts and feelings. And our thoughts and feelings motivate our belief, and our belief system motivates our thoughts and feelings. And we try to put meaning to what's going on around us. So conflict forms the meanings that we attach to the circumstances, the events, the situations, the words that have been said. And then that manifests itself in our own words and actions when we're in conflict. So conflict comes from the meaning that we attach to what's going on around us or what's been said around us. So there's a concept of conflict that you may have heard before or may not have heard before, that conflict is an inside out progression. It moves from the inside of us, our thoughts, our feelings, and what we believe is going on around us. Conflict is not what's going on outside of us, the circumstance, and it may be negative, it may be wrong, it may be bad, but the conflict comes because of the meaning that we attach to what's going on around us. So here's the first question I'd love for you to give some response to, and I'd love to get your feedback on, and you can type your response in the chat, is what do you believe are the thoughts and feelings that cause conflict during this time of COVID? If the thoughts and feelings are what causes conflict, what do you think some of those thoughts are? Either your own thoughts or the thoughts of others that are in conflict around you? What do you believe are some of those thoughts and feelings that cause conflict during this time of COVID? I'll give you a second to respond in the chat, and that'll give me a chance to come over and take a look. Yes, fear. That's a big one, isn't it? And we've all experienced that. Yeah, loss of freedom. Yep. Yeah, that feeling of frustration. Yep, Joseph, you just mentioned it. Frustration of not being able to make decisions or really define what normal is anymore because our normal has changed. Anxiety, yes, Felix, that's right. Being unsure of what will happen next. So there's uncertainty, there's loss, there's frustration, and fear. Yeah. Those are great responses. Great responses. How many of those responses were positive? 0. Yeah. Because what happens, because conflict is an inside out progression, and we believe something uh, um, is negative um, or not healthy or not right, our thoughts and feelings begin to agree with our beliefs and vice versa. And so we will attach meaning to say, this isn't right, this is wrong. And it's that attached meaning that will create those moments of tension and conflict um, in our relationships with those that we care about most in our own relationship, but also those uh, that we lead. And um, and they're just as frustrated as we are. They're just as anxiety filled as we are. It's fascinating. Anxiety, we have the opportunity. Anxiety can either fuel fear or anticipation. Um, and it depends on um, what we do with that anxiety, where we take that anxiety. It can fuel the fear behind conflict, or it can be an anticipation point to allow us to move through it. So there are several different types of thoughts and feelings causing conflict during this time of COVID. A lot of it deals with the loss, and with loss comes grief. And so let me talk just a second about grief and its contribution to conflict. When we are grieving the loss of something, and grief is more than just loss of death, and this pandemic has provided too many opportunities for us to experience death and grieve loss. But we've also lost normalcy. We've lost some of us hopes and goals and dreams, and there are some things that we've lost that cause us to grieve. And when we grieve, we go through these emotional processes, and some of that is anger toward the situation and anger at people, and anger is one of those feelings that can cause conflict to well up inside of us. And so there's this loss that permeates our thought process and um, and really kickstarts um, the the conflict inside of us. So if you think of the people that you're leading and the people that you're engaging with on a daily basis, every one of them have a story, and every one of them have experienced loss to some degree, some more so than others and some less so. But everyone has experienced loss during this COVID season, and every one of us have attached meaning to that loss. And so our thoughts and our feelings and the beliefs that we hold are fueling the potential for conflict within us. So there's one question I want every leader to ask, because what you've just heard about conflict is that conflict is about the person, okay, not about the circumstance. So because conflict is about the person, here's the question: what's the most loving and gracious thing I can say or do in this moment? Because really, that's all we have is this moment. Um, and when we're dealing with conflict, we can't really think long term, 90 days out, 180 days out, 3 months from now. We have to think in this moment. And so the one question I want every leader to ask is, what's the most loving and gracious thing I can say or do in the moment? Well, there's an assumption in this question, and that is that you understand what loving and gracious mean. The ability to be loving and the ability to extend grace. There's a saying, and I don't know how popular it is worldwide, but giving someone the benefit of the doubt. That leans more toward the assumption that if I give you the benefit of the doubt, that means that I'm pretty sure you're going to mess up again. I'm pretty sure that you're not going to do this right again. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm somewhat doubting that you're going to be able to uphold your end of the agreement, but I will give you the benefit of the doubt, which means I will walk lightly in this relationship. I will not wholeheartedly engage. Instead of giving the benefit of the doubt, I want to encourage you to give the benefit of the grace. To be gracious is something that you can do. You can allow relationship. You can allow someone who has messed up to be forgiven, to be given another opportunity um, to be gracious in the way that you engage. So what's the most loving and gracious thing I can say or do in this moment is the question I would want you to ask. But I also want you to give us, let's share ideas with one another. How could you show love and grace when in conflict? What are some of the things that you could say or do that would show love and grace for someone that you're in conflict with? What are some ideas that you have? And you can type that into the chat for us so that we can all learn together. One example would be listening. That's a loving thing to do when you're in conflict, is to listen. Yeah. Yes, Felix, praying, showing compassion. Yes. Showing love and grace is a reflection of who you are. And so you bring yourself to this conflict, regardless of your role in it. And so you are either showing love and grace in conflict, or you're showing your other face in conflict. You can listen. That's a great way to show compassion. You can ask the other person, help me understand. And then there's a difference between listening to what they say and hearing what they say. Because remember, if conflict is the meaning that we attach and it's an inside out process, then let's remember that it's about the person, not the event or circumstance. So the most loving and gracious thing to do would be to ask them to help you understand where they're coming from. We'll get to more of that in just a moment. But showing love and grace is going to be incredibly important. And negotiating, yes, there's a process of asking questions to clarify and to define. But we'll be getting to that in just a moment. Let's talk about COVID-19, the pandemic that we're currently in. And at this point, for those of you who are watching video, not live, but somewhere down the road, our prayer is that COVID-19 is not the pandemic that it currently is. There is hope in that direction. But let's talk specifically about what COVID-19 is in light of conflict. And so this may raise an eyebrow. This may make you think, is that right? And so let me reframe this for you. Let me put this in a context that COVID-19 does not create conflict. It's an environment that highlights it. That's an interesting concept, because, and feel free to type in the chat if you agree or disagree, or if you have a question about that. But COVID does not create the conflict. It's an environment that highlights it. How does that happen? Well, since conflict is an inside-out progression, not an outside-in aggression, COVID has caused all of us to be a little more susceptible to the hurts. We're heightened in our senses of loss, of grief. And so when something doesn't go our way, when we have a desire and we don't get it, and someone or something is standing in our way, that creates conflict. And so that begins to boil within us. COVID has created an environment where all the people who are boiling over things are getting to a place where it's just too much and the conflict just erupts. COVID brings conflict to the surface. It did not create conflict. It's just given us an opportunity to express it. So again, conflict is not the environment or the circumstance around us. It is the meaning that we have attached to whatever's going on around us. So COVID-19 is just it's the environment that's conducive right now for people to get their feelings hurt or to be overly sensitive or have the inability to cope with the new reality that we find ourselves in. We've never been here before. And those of us who are wired in ways that need structure and everything in place, it's a very difficult time because every day we wake up, we hear news about this change or news about this change, or here's what was going to happen, it's not going to happen. And then, of course, all of the unknowns create in us just this angst that can well up and create conflict, because conflict, again, is an inside out progression, not an outside in aggression toward us. So here's a question. What is the greatest challenge COVID has caused your leadership? What do you sense? What have you experienced? What are you seeing among your friends and colleagues who are leaders? What's the greatest challenge that COVID has caused your leadership? So go ahead and type your response in the chat and let us know, because this will help us train and develop and look at future ways that we can come alongside and assist if we can. But what's the greatest challenge that COVID has caused your leadership? I learned a long time ago that sometimes silence is okay. And so I want to give you plenty of opportunity to provide an answer or response in the chat without talking over you as you're thinking through an answer. Yeah, there's been it's been difficult because we've not been able to come together and communicate with each other or commune with each other. So our community has looked differently. Joseph, I know what you mean. Staring at a computer screen is terrible. All these virtual meetings, virtual conversations. I miss personal interaction. Yeah, having to find new ways to do the old things that we were comfortable with, adapting to new ways of working. Absolutely. So without the normal process of communicating with each other, our community, and one mentioned the church, that is a community of like-minded believers who the faith is built on communion and coming together and fellowship. And so not having that as a leader is difficult. I'm curious, in light of the changes that COVID has brought, whether that be through new laws that we have to wear masks or new laws that we have to stay 6 feet apart or whatever the distance is, what's the most loving and gracious thing you can do for the people that you lead who are experiencing these same things that you're experiencing, these challenges? of not being able to be with their friends, some not even be able to be with their families. What's the most loving and gracious thing that you can do as a leader as you lead those who are facing these challenges? The reality of COVID has caused us to experience things that we're not comfortable with. The reality is that that holds true for those that we lead and those that we're in relationship with also. So what would be comforting for you in this time? And that's where I would like us to go, because your leadership requires compassion moving forward. And so what does it mean to be a compassionate leader? In light of COVID, in light of conflict, how can you show compassion in what you do? Well, the solution does start with you as the leader. You have this opportunity to lead your people well in this season. To show compassion to others requires you to see, hear, and understand where they're hurting, which is why I've been asking these questions about what you see, what's the most loving and gracious thing you can say or do in this moment. If you're going to ask yourself that question, you have to be able to see, hear, and understand where people are hurting, because it's that hurt that is attached to a belief, that meaning has been attached to, that thoughts and feelings develop within the individual to create conflict that boils up during this time of COVID. So to show compassion to others requires you to see, hear, and understand where they're hurting. I mentioned earlier there's a difference between listening and hearing. When we listen to people, we can hear what they're saying, we know what they're saying, but if I really hear them, I can listen to what they're saying and kind of know what's behind what they're saying. I'm hearing their heart, not just their words. So the challenge is to do both, listen and hear. You want to listen and you want to hear their heart. What meanings have they attached to what's going on? So showing compassion to others requires you to see, hear, and understand where they're hurting. But to lead with compassion requires you to feel your own level of pain. This is getting a little difficult here, right? We don't wake up every morning and want to look at our pain or acknowledge our level of hurt in our lives, or the potential conflicts or the conflicts that we're in. But to lead with compassion, it requires you to feel your own level of pain so that you can be moved to help others with theirs. You have to have an understanding of you. You have to see, hear, and understand what are the motivations you've attached along the way. It starts with you as the leader. Your beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings will determine your responses. How you respond to someone is going to be tied to what you believe. Your thoughts, your feelings, what you've attached to what's going on around you. So solution starts with you as the leader. This may be a little more difficult question, but it's something that we really need to ask ourselves as leaders. What are you feeling or thinking about your ability to lead others with compassion during a pandemic? What are you feeling or thinking about your ability to lead? I've talked to several different leaders during this past year of change and COVID. And I've heard several different feelings and thoughts about their leadership. Well, I'm curious where you are in your leadership. What are you feeling or thinking about your ability to lead others with compassion during this pandemic? What are some words that you would use to describe that? Feel free to type that in the chat for us. What you're going to see as the chat box begins to fill up with words is that you're not alone. What you're feeling, what you're thinking is more common. What are you feeling or thinking about your ability to lead others? Good, good. So you are to be a support to others. Yes, and thinking about your ability to be able to encourage them, to be there for them when they're struggling. Good, good. And for some leaders, that can create in your own heart this overwhelming sense of, I have to have all the answers. I have to be there. And so leaders that I've been talking to are feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling like as they support and encourage those that they lead, they're feeling themselves being poured out and unsupported, and they're feeling weak. They're thinking that they're not able to do this. So those are some of the feelings and thoughts that I've been receiving from different leaders during this season of a pandemic that we're in. But I want to remind us all to step back a little bit and look at it this way, that you are not in a different place than those that you're leading. Those that you're leading are in the same place that you are in terms of this pandemic. We're all feeling loss. We're all feeling overwhelmed at times. We all need support. We all need encouragement. We all have needs. One of the healthiest things that I've seen leaders do during this time is to be vulnerable, to be real, to be humble, to be authentic in their leadership. Yes, they're adapting in leadership, which is required because COVID has required change for us. But being authentic in your leadership, sharing what you're feeling or thinking with those that you lead allows them and gives them permission to share how they're feeling or thinking. And so you are leading them by being authentic with them. And honestly, it's not all about your ability. It is about your availability to people as you engage them on a heart level. You support and encourage them that way. So I want to give you 3 steps to lead with compassion. I think I've built the case that compassion is a way to lead where you can engage people. These 3 steps are somewhat easy to remember. At least it was for me when I first learned the lesson. I didn't first learn this lesson as a leader. I first learned this lesson when I was about 9 years old. And here in the United States, the month of July is a celebration for us because we celebrate our country's independence. And one of the ways that we do that is we shoot fireworks into the air and we celebrate as friends and family. When I was 9 years old, I went to my grandfather's house, and as our family gathered, we had fireworks and we were shooting them off into the sky. It was a beautiful celebration. Well, one of those fireworks fell over And instead of shooting into the sky and making brilliant light, it shot into a field of dry grass. And when that explosive went off in that dry grass, guess what happened? A little fire started to, the embers started to come up. And as a 9-year-old little boy, me and my cousin who was with me, about the same age, we ran over, we crawled through the fence there, and we were just looking at this little fire in front of us. Well, I was thinking to myself, if I try to put this out, what's going to happen to me if I catch on fire? And so my thoughts are running wild with me. And I remembered at that point what my teachers in school had taught me, and my parents had taught me, that if I ever catch on fire, my clothes catch on fire, I'm to do 3 things. I'm to stop, drop, and roll. Stop, drop, and roll. If your clothes catch on fire, that way the oxygen won't, engulf you in flames. So as I'm standing there over this little fire, thinking about stop and drop and roll, my cousin actually tamped out the fire. And so it was not a big deal. He took care of it. But that's when I learned that lesson of stop, drop, and roll. And you know what? That lesson is true for us as we engage and lead with compassion. We stop the thoughts, drop the assumptions, and roll into action. So stop, drop, and roll is what I want to challenge you with. These are the 3 steps to lead with compassion, which they sound great, but what does that mean? Stop the thoughts. All right? Pause. That's what that means. When we're in conflict, and this is in the immediacy of conflict, we have felt it well up inside of us. Someone else has felt conflict rise up in them, and they're bringing it out on us. What's the first thing we need to pause? Take a deep breath. Don't do or say what you want to do or say. All right? And what you want to do or say may be good, or it may be bad. But to stop the thoughts means to pause. Let me say it this way. Do not engage. Even if you think you are right, in the immediacy of the conflict, stop the thoughts. Not only if you think you're right, but if you are actually right, if you know you're right, still don't engage. Stop the thought. Only think one thought in that moment. In the immediacy of conflict, loving and gracious, loving and gracious, loving and gracious. Because you remember that one question? What's the most loving and gracious thing you can say or do in this moment? Loving and gracious. When conflict hits, when you feel conflict welling up inside of you, and when someone else has expressed conflict toward you, pause. Think loving and gracious. Stop the thoughts. The second thing to do is to drop. Stop, drop, and roll. Stop the thoughts. Drop the assumptions. Assumptions are what we provide when answers aren't there. So when we don't have the answers to something, we'll assume something. When things aren't clear to us, we fill in the blank of the answer that we assume to be true. Our opinions are based on what we assume we know. So in conflict, what will happen is we don't have all the facts. We don't have all of the information. We know what we think we know. So our opinion of what's happening is formed. We need to drop the assumptions, because accusations happen when we assume we're right. I'll give you a second to read that again. You know, conflict is escalated, and there's a point in conflict where we begin to accuse the other person. Accusations happen when we assume we're right, and opinions are based on what we assume we know. We must drop the assumptions, replace them by clarifying and defining. 2 of my favorite words are clarify and define. Because if I don't have clarity to something, I really don't know what direction to go. And if I don't have definition, then I'm assuming that I know what I think I know. And it oftentimes derails. So replace assumptions by clarifying and defining. So stop, drop, and roll. Stop the thoughts, pause, take a deep breath, think loving and gracious. What's the most loving and gracious thing I can say or do in this moment? Drop the assumptions. Let's try to clarify and define what's going on. I will not assume something negative about the person that is in conflict with me. I will not assume the worst case scenario, that this is terrible. I will not assume that I know why this conflict is happening, but I will seek clarification and definition. I will replace my assumptions with clarifying and defining. How do we do that? We roll into action. Stop, drop, and roll. Roll into action. The first thing we want to do is clarify. What are the facts? Now, notice I'm not asking you to agree with the other person that you're in conflict with about what the facts are. You and I have both experienced, I'm sure, at some point where we have seen the same thing, but we see it from different perspectives and different angles. And so what I would tell you would be a fact, you would dispute because you're seeing it from a different perspective and a different angle. And you would say that this is the fact, when in reality, both of us have accurate perspectives from our angle. So to clarify when we're in conflict with someone requires us to ask questions. Ask questions that are open-ended. And why did you do that isn't a good open-ended question, even though it's open-ended. Anytime you start a question with why, that puts the other person on defense. And so start with help instead of why. Help me understand. How did you see it? How did this come about between us? Help me understand. You want to clarify what the facts are. You don't have to agree with whatever the other person says. If the other person says X, Y, and Z happened, this happened, and you think it's ABC that happened, you thank them for sharing their perspective on what they believe to be the facts. You don't have to agree, but you do need to acknowledge. That's the key. All right. So seeking clarification requires questions that you ask to get to the facts, which really are a perspective of the facts that have happened. The second way to roll into action is to seek. So you're clarifying, you're seeking. What are you seeking? Definition. You're asking questions that get to the meaning that have been attached. Because remember, conflict is about the meaning that has been attached in an individual's heart and their thoughts and their feelings. And so ask questions that will get behind the facts. Help me understand on a deeper level. And you can use specific questions to get to that. So what does it mean to you? Or how did this affect you? When this happened, I saw it as this way. How did you see it? Begin a communication and a dialogue through conflict rather than an adversarial, I've got to be right and you have to be wrong type of attitude. Understanding is needed in order to lead with compassion. And this is to help those that you lead deal with their conflicts among one another, but it's also to help you as a leader model for them when you're in conflict, how to stop, drop, and roll. Stop the thoughts, drop the assumptions, and roll into action. So we clarify, what are the facts? We seek, what meaning is attached? Understanding is needed. And then we act, all right? Now, all of us are wired differently when it comes to conflict. Some of us can't wait to get into it. Hey, we have to deal with this. We have to deal with it now. We're going to talk about it, and you're not going to run away from it. Other people are like, you know what? I'm just not going to deal with this right now. We're not going to talk about it. I am going to run from it, and you're not going to chase me because you're you're too overbearing. So what does action look like? Rolling into action means that we slowly respond through thoughtful communication. Slowly respond with thoughtful communication. You are acting in that way. So clarify, define. Two of my favorite words. You need to apply those. We need to apply those to conflict. We do that in order to find out what the facts are, or the perspective of the facts, not so that we will agree with what happened, but that we will acknowledge that something happened, and that you have a perspective and I have a perspective. We acknowledge that. I'm not trying to prove you right or wrong or vice versa. I'm looking for the meaning that has been attached. Why is this important to me? I need to understand why this conflict is welling up inside of me. What's important about this to me? And what is important about this to you? And then act. Slowly respond with thoughtful communication, asking questions, affirming the relationship, saying what needs to be said in a way that is humble, loving, gracious. That sounds a whole lot like a question I need to be asking myself through this whole thing. What's the most loving and gracious thing I can say or do in this moment? And rolling into action puts that into place. Here's something I want you to keep in mind. We don't control the outcomes. We control our contribution. Our contribution to the solution and our contribution to the conflict. We don't control the outcomes. We control our contribution. So that was a lot. I just gave you a whole lot of information, and I want you to be able to process that. I want you to be able to ask questions. And so we can do this by unmuting, and you can ask a question that way, or you can type a question in the chat, and Jennifer is going to help me, and I'm sure Jay will be looking as well. And we will want to answer the questions that you have. Feel free to ask those at this time. All right.
So Eric, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So when the earlier when you were talking about people, they shut down. They say, "Stop! You're too aggressive. You're bothering me." Is there a time period that you say, "Okay, step away until you go back," or do you just wait for them to respond back to you?
Yeah, if the relationship is at risk, if there's a risk of a break in relationship, then I would say that you communicate to them that this is too important for us not to talk about, because the relationship is too important. I understand that you need some time to process this. I'd like us to talk about this in 48 hours, or put a time frame that is comfortable, put it out there, and ask if they would be willing to talk to you in 48 hours or 2 days.